Paul Johnson here of the Bel-Airs, ladies and gentlemen. He was supposed to play for us. Very somberly, he called me and let me know that it just wasn't going to happen, that his hands weren't cooperating, that he's got a little bit of arthritis going on. And he felt it was better to talk to you all and say hello. And he loves being here, and he loves watching other bands play. As I like to say, and Baha Marty used to say, he loves the stoke of watching other bands. He gets the energy. That's one thing that, not to put down other people, but Dick Dale would hide in the green room, or he would hide in his RV while other bands are playing. Paul Johnson loves watching all the other bands. So I got to say kudos to Paul for that. So our good friend Jonpaul is here to interview Paul Johnson. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we're just going to treat this like a very informal, just kind of one-on-one. One-on-one meaning you one and us one. And, we'll open it up to some Q&A after. If you guys have any burning questions, this is your chance. You have one of the pioneers, like literally one of the two originators, the Big Bang of surf music right here on the stage, alive, well, in person, and we're so happy to have him. We're so blessed and honored that PJ's here anyway, regardless of whatever else is going on. So much respect to you, endless respect to you for creating this thing, being a partial creator of this thing that we all adore and hold so dear and are trying to, carry on into the generations further and further and further. I want to get into some questions I've always wanted to ask you, and I thought those would be kind of some cool things to talk about in front of people. And then also I want to get into maybe some of your favorite stories or some interesting factoids and tidbits from the very early origin days where it was just you and Eddie, and that spark that happened. Is there anything you'd like to say right off the bat, like as a little intro or to get us rolling?
Well, let's just go for it, man.
All right, we'll get into it. So, the first big thing, right? The origins of surf music. Dick Dale over here, the Bel-Airs over here. And quite literally, if we're talking geographically, over here being Orange County for Dick, the South Bay for the Bel-Airs. Now, there's still a lot of discussion back and forth, controversy, if you will, about...
Controversy?
Yeah. Who was the first? What was what came first? Now, I know it was concurrent in a lot of ways, and the geography did have, played a role. And the two styles are very differently. I gave a seminar once where I said that there's the high energy style, which we mostly associate with surf, which is the Dick Dale thing, the tremolo picking, the big amps, the reverb tank, all the tropes, right? All of the things, the qualities that make surf music. That's a Dick Dale thing. Now over here, you had the Bel-Airs that were doing much more of a melodic thing. It's all about the songwriting, all about the melody and the harmony and the arrangements, right? And it's a much more relaxed approach. It's not so rock and roll. It's much more of a songwriting thing and just a beautiful music and composition, right? So, having said that, we've got the two things, the Big Bang, all that stuff's happening at the time. Let's set the stage, the era, right? What came first?
You what, Dick Dale or the Bel-Airs?
Yeah.
Well, the way I like to put it is that Dick's Let's Go Trippin' hit the charts before Mr. Moto. But Mr. Moto was was recorded earlier. So Mr. Moto was, I like to say, was the earliest hit recording to be tagged as surf music. Yeah! Thank you.
So your recording preceded.
The recording did, yeah.
It preceded hitting the charts, but did it precede him getting that kind of attention at that time?
No, he was already, as I mentioned in the interview you just saw on the surf movie, I remember hanging out at Torrance Beach, and all the surfers were talking about going down to the rendezvous to see Dick Dale, like it was a big pilgrimage for the surfers, you know. And I remember it was the summer of '61, excuse me, and we decided, well, hey, let's get in on this. So we started throwing dances in Redondo Beach. We had 3 dances that we threw at the Knights of Columbus Hall in Hollywood Riviera, which is right up from Torrance Beach. And I remember we passed out flyers on the beach, and sure enough, all the surfers showed up at the dance. Now, I should point out that nobody was pretending to invent something called surf music.
Right.
The way I recall it, and I think that where the credit is due, is that the surfers were coming to the dances, and I remember the first dance we threw, I remember when this local surfer came up to me during a break, and he says, "Wow, man, your music sounds just like it feels out on a wave. You ought to call it surf music." I'd never even thought about that concept. But what happened was, by the end of that summer, the surfers who were going to see Dick Dale and the Bel-Airs were calling it surf music. And that's how it came about.
So the surfers really were the ones that coined that term.
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
gave it that descriptor.
Yeah.
So this is not like music critics or, you know, the know-it-alls. This is actually the surfers in attendance saying, "Man, now that's surf music."
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's even just to know that is a profound
And of
thing.
course, right after that came the Beach Boys. Their record, Surfin', hit the charts shortly after Mr. Moto. And actually, I remember the Bel-Airs had a TV show. It was the Wink Martindale Dance Party from the Long Beach Municipal Auditorium. And on the same show happened to be the Beach Boys. So I met the Beach Boys on the TV show. And at the time, the Bel-Airs were actually much more, well, you know, they were more of what the surfers referred to as surf music. In fact, they had this attitude that the Beach Boys were kind of candy coating the whole thing, and that it wasn't really surf music.
They were kind of cashing in on it.
Yeah, they were, yeah. So anyway, they invited me to ride home with them in their car. So I went home with the Beach Boys that evening. They took me home. I started hanging out with them after that, mostly with Dennis. And Dennis's idea of a good time was to go out on the streets of Inglewood with me, and he'd walk up to girls and say, "Hey, you recognize me? I'm one of the Beach Boys." And if they didn't get the proper response, then they'd say, "And he's one of the Bel-Airs." Now, I remember the classic example of this was when Dennis and I went to a movie at the Inglewood Theater. We were up in the balcony, and we were sitting behind a couple of girls, and Dennis was making a point of saying, loud enough for them to hear, he was saying, hey, we're going in next week to make a recording of our follow-up to surfing. And the girls wouldn't turn around. So finally, Dennis taps him on the shoulder and he says, let's go out into the hall. I want to talk to you. So we went out into the hall by the balcony, and he says to the girls, yeah, you recognize me? I'm one of the Beach Boys. And they said, you know that record, Surfin'? And they actually said, yeah, we don't really like that record.
Good for them.
And then he says, well, how about Mr. Moto? And they go, oh, we like that record. And so he says, well, this is one of the Bel-Airs. So that was a big deal.
One of my favorite things from the movie is when you talk about the high school hits, like the high schools that would call in and try and get some played more than others.
That was Sam Riddles had this show called the Topic Youth Survey at 9 o'clock on weeknights, and they would feature different surveys from the various high schools. And RV Records wasn't really doing much to promote our record, but during the summer we had gathered a following, and so we started hyping the record to the radio stations.
And now, how old are you at this point? I mean, you're in high school, right?
I think I was 15.
Yeah. You're barely in high school, and you're doing all this work actually pushing a band, you know, the promotion and the bookings and, you know, and was that all you guys doing that yourselves? Was that all the kids, all you guys?
Pretty much, yeah. We, like I say, we were throwing dances. And we threw 3 dances at the Knights of Columbus, and then we had one at the Eagles Hall. And then finally, the big one was at the Hermosa Biltmore, which was kind of like the Rendezvous Ballroom. It was a big, old-style ballroom. And we had 1,500 kids show up there. Yeah, that was pretty darn cool.
That's cool. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, man.
Is that the biggest?
Yeah,
at the time?
That was our biggest of that summer anyway.
That is so awesome. So cool. You know, were you guys aware at the time? Obviously, you said you were aware of what Dick was doing, but did you feel a sense of rivalry, or did you feel like, oh, this is, you know, there's a competition going on?
Not really. I acknowledged that Dick Dale was the king of surf music, and I figured.
Wait.
I figured.
Did you hear that?
I figured I was the Duke.
Nice. Do you think that having not feeling that rivalry was because of the geographic distance?
Partly.
Yeah.
And partly because Dick Dale was hands down the most powerful. You know, the Bel-Airs were subtler.
Yeah, of course. Now, at what point was there a specific moment when Eddie, meaning Eddie Bertrand, got the bug, when it just got in his system so much that he had to emulate Dick Dale? Was there like a turning point, and what was it? And what was the inspiration? Like, how did that come about?
As the documentary showed, Eddie really wanted to go full reverb, and I was good with reverb to a point, you know. But I thought the quality that the Bel-Airs had was the interplay between the guitars, and that precluded, you know, having the full-on reverb thing. Although we did play with reverb, and I, you know, it's a myth that I didn't like reverb. I was fine with it, but I just thought that's not what we're about. You know, we were looking for a follow-up hit to Mr. Moto, and we did some recording, and but Eddie, he really got the bug, you know.
Was he going to see Dick? Like, was he going down to the Rendezvous and standing in front of that and just feeling that and hearing that and going, man, I got to do this?
I don't recall exactly what he was doing on his own time, but I just remember that the reverb was coming on strong, and he wanted to identify with that fully. And I wanted to have a moderate use of reverb so that the guitars were still, you know, the interplay between the guitars was what it was all about for me. And I was coming up with arrangements and original tunes that featured our style.
Yeah.
And Eddie, at a certain point, when we didn't come up with a follow-up hit, first of all, Delvy left. Delvy went and formed the Challengers.
Was he the first one to leave?
Yeah, he was the first one to leave. And he went and, I remember he moved to Hollywood, and I remember going up and visiting him in Hollywood. And of course, the Challengers did a bunch of my tunes. And I remember that Delvy's thing was, he'd take me out to breakfast at the IHOP in Hollywood and get me to sign over one of my tunes so that they could do it, you know. And let's see.
Was that okay, or was that sort of like a kind of a underhanded way to?
No, that was cool.
Okay.
Although I never really got any money from it. But so when Delvy left, we got Dickie Dodd to play drums. He was a friend of mine at Redondo High. And of course, Dickie was a former Mouseketeer, so it was like instant celebrity to have him join the band. And he was a great drummer. And so when Eddie decided to leave, he took Dickie with him and formed the Showmen. Then we got George Dumas and Art Fisher to play. George Dumas was the drummer from the Journeymen, and Art Fisher was the guitar player from the Journeymen, which was a band that actually predated the Bel-Airs. They were kind of an R&B flavored band, you know, in the South Bay that was playing around. And so I thought Artie was really cool, you know, so I invited him to join the Bel-Airs, and he brought George Dumas with him. And at that point, we also, you know, in the early days, we didn't have a bass player. We didn't realize that we needed one. Because I was playing a style of rhythm that kind of covered the bass, and I felt like we were complete without it. But after Artie and George joined, there was this guy from the East Coast named Steve Lotto, a bass player. And we got him to join, and then we had, of course, Chaz Stewart was the sax player, great sax player. And we started playing around as what I call now the second generation Bel-Airs.
Did you guys still have keys at that time?
Jimmy Roberts was our occasional keyboard player. We used him on recording sessions and on some gigs, but we were mainly two guitars, drums, and bass.
So one thing I'm really noticing here is you guys really had an emphasis on all the guys in the band. It was about the band,
Yeah,
right?
uh-huh.
It was about each of these individuals together to make this special thing, and you're giving prominence to Art Fisher and the other guitar, whereas the Dick Dale thing was really just about Dick.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the band was amazing, and it took that to have that kind of, impact.
Uh-huh.
But at the end of the day, really, that was just all about Dick.
Yeah.
But you guys you still had that band mentality.
We were an ensemble.
Yeah, but you guys were I think you were probably closer. You were brothers almost because you had gone to high school together, and you had that history. You were friends first.
Yeah.
And so that came across in the music. It wasn't just...
Dick was a star.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's an interesting point to me, So the later iteration of the Bel-Airs, like Bel-Airs Mark II, right, with the new guys,
Yeah.
how long did that continue on? And around what year is that?
Oh, we're talking 1962, kind of going into 63. And, we had our own home base. It was originally called the Bel-Air Club in Redondo Beach. And then Reb Foster took it over and renamed it the Revel Air. And he ended up being kind of a manager for Eddie, too. So Eddie would play at the Bel-Air Club once in a while with the Showman. But Eddie was now really starting to... he was actually doing a good job of challenging Dick Dale on his home turf, playing at the Retail Clerks in Buena Park. And help me out
Did
here.
he when he was doing that and he had the expanded band, right? He had more members. He added more instrumentation. Obviously, that was a direct inspiration from Dick's big band,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Because it's clear that he was intimidating and he was trying to go after that kind of Dick Dale thing.
Yeah. Like I say, he challenged Dick Dale on his own terms, on his own turf.
Did Dick know about this?
Oh, I'm sure.
Like, was he
did.
like, hey, you hear about this kid Eddie Bertrand? He's coming up after me. Did he know?
Yeah, he was aware because it was another big draw there in Orange County.
Did they ever play together?
Not that I know of.
I mean, on the same bill, not like, a dueling thing, although that would have been, like, forget it,
Not
right?
that I know of, but I remember the Bel-Airs did play the Rendezvous a couple times.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about Volcanic Action,
Yeah.
right? The recording, because from what I understand, and this is exactly why we need you here to set the record straight, that was the song and the recording session that was sort of the breaking point with the reverb issue.
Yeah, when we were trying to get a follow-up to Mr. Moto, we recorded Eddie's tune, Volcanic Action. And I remember at that point that I didn't think that was in keeping with the tradition that we had already set, but that came out as a single, but it didn't do anything. We didn't get any kind of airplay or anything on that. And I was still looking for something else to happen for the Bel-Airs.
But he wanted to use the tank, right?
Pardon?
He wanted to use the tank, the outboard reverb
Oh,
unit,
yeah. Uh-huh.
and you weren't so keen on it, or maybe a little less, or use it but less, and that was sort of like the argument.
Well, I wanted to keep the ensemble approach. And I figured, there's already a Dick Dale. We don't necessarily need to try to be Dick Dale. We needed to continue on in our own tradition.
So it was really more about the style. It was more about your style, the Bel-Airs style, and the Bel-Airs way of doing things than the specific use of reverb per se.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that actually clears up a lot because you always read these stories. Oh, no, it was the tank. Eddie brought in the tank, Paul didn't want the tank, and then they had a big fight, and that was the end.
Well, that's a little bit of an exaggeration because I was just trying to moderate the use of the tank, you know. And I didn't mind, you know, having some of that, but we were, you know, we were our own thing.
Yeah, you were, and still are. Still are. That stuff it's unmistakable. You put on a Bel-Airs record, man, it can only be the Bel-Airs.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, in the beginning, you guys both played Strats.
Yeah.
You were both Strat guys.
Right.
Now, this was probably what, maybe 59? When did you guys meet and realize, oh, we both play guitar?
That would have been in probably 60 or 61, actually.
Okay. Well, it must have been 60, because didn't
Well, yeah.
Moto already came out in 61?
Yeah.
So let's say 60, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to get a general time frame. So
Yeah, Eddie and I started getting together and playing together in probably 60.
okay. What was it about the Strat that you guys were drawn to, as opposed to, say, going for a Jazzmaster? Because that would have been available. But remember, the Jaguar wouldn't have been available yet. Hadn't even come out yet.
Right.
So it wasn't even an option. So you're saying, all right, Stratocaster, Jazzmaster.
Mm-hmm.
Why the Strat?
Because we thought Buddy Holly looked really cool with a Strat.
There it is.
Yeah, and I remember the way it happened was I met Eddie on the school bus, and we both had like sketched guitars on our notebooks, you know, and I saw his notebook with a picture of a Stratocaster on it, and he saw mine, and hey, you know, it's like we discovered we're both big fans of Duane Eddy and Johnny and the Hurricanes, and then the Fireballs. The Fireballs were probably the biggest influence on the Bel-Airs in terms of, again, it being about the interplay between the guitars.
Yeah. Right on, man. I love it. So I just got the 5-minute warning from the BTD, and I want to thank PJ for his time today and for being gracious enough to answer some dumb surf nerd questions. But
hey, folks, I'm really sorry not to be playing today. I was really looking forward to playing today because I haven't played a public show with my own band for years, actually. So I was thinking, wow, I really want to. I want this to be like kind of like a real testimony that I was still in the game. But then when I was practicing, one of the things that happened while I was practicing for the gig was that I was realizing how challenging my own tunes are to play properly. And my arthritis was just really getting in the way. And I thought, well, I want to do a show and make a good showing, but on the other hand, I don't want to get up there and just like have everybody go, wow, he's really lost it, you know.
well, we really appreciate you being here anyway,
but
man.
I do look forward to playing again. I'm not out of the game. I just
Oh no.
Just thank you. And as JP suggested earlier, or as maybe it was Jeff who said that I enjoy seeing the various bands, I feel like I'm seeing, you know, my grandkids playing. You know, the Winterfest and all your yeah.
Yeah, there's a very special thing. So, I mean, we're spoiled and blessed to be in Southern California because we have such an abundance of this music and so many events, and everybody's, you know, people like Paul are here. But when you do a local show, especially in the South Bay, And there's this moment when you're maybe a new band or you're just starting out, and you see Paul, and oh my God, Paul Johnson's here. And then there's a moment where he comes up to the front of the stage, you know, he's kind of standing there, and you don't really know, does he like it? Does he not like it? Like, what's going on? Like, oh my God, this is the judgment, you know? And PJ's standing there, and then, you know, all of a sudden there'll be like a big thumbs up.
Yep.
You know, or he'll say, hey, you guys aren't half bad, you know? Or his quintessential, these little quirks, and...
I just really appreciate the directions that all of you have taken the music. You know. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being you and doing what you did and doing what you do, and for helping to start this whole thing and inspire multiple generations of people that love this music so much.
Right.
Thanks, man. Much respect.
Thank you, everybody. God bless you. Thanks, JP.
Matt Quilter has a question.
So we know, Paul, we know that you were a huge Duane Eddy fan, but what I want to know is when you and Eddie were kids at 14 or 15, there must have been bands playing around. Somebody must have inspired you to pick up an instrument. Did you ever used to watch those things on Channel 5, the town hall parties and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah.
What bands inspired you locally to pick up a guitar and start a band?
Well, like I said, the Journeymen would have been a big factor, because they were playing teen dances in the South Bay.
Did you have bands come to your high school and stuff?
Yeah, We had a regular Friday night dance thing at Redondo High School that we played at sometimes. Yeah.
And were you a record buying kid where you get every 45 that came out?
Yeah, I remember the first records that I bought were back in the mid-50s. I bought, I think my first big favorite record was actually The Great Pretender by the Platters. And I also got a copy of Lonnie Donegan's Rock Island Line. Those were favorite tunes of mine. But then, I started, working on emulating, along with Eddie, we basically were learning Duane Eddy tunes, etc. And what happened was, actually prior to this, when I was about 13, I'd say, I remember in my house, leaning against a chair was a guitar that my grandfather on my mother's side had owned. And I never even thought about playing it. But my sister, my older sister, had a friend who was a folk singer. And for some reason, I don't know why, but this is how it started for me, was she pointed at that guitar and she said, "Hey, would you like me to teach you how to play the guitar?" And I remember my answer was, "Can you teach me how to play Duane Eddy's Rebel Rouser?" She said, "Yeah." So we worked out Rebel Rouser, and she also taught me a few basic chords, just enough for me to get the hook in my jaw, and I started practicing all these tunes and learning how to play. Then I met Eddie, and then it became it wasn't so much I was learning to play as a soloist, but I was learning to play as a partner with Eddie. And that gave me the opportunity to develop ideas for arrangements and come up with tune ideas that Eddie and I would learn to play. Thanks.
One more gearhead question, Paul. I know Jonpaul kind of covered this. So my earliest pictures that I've seen of you, you're playing a Strat through, it looked like a Brown Fender concert. Is that correct? And was that the first good amp and first good guitar that you had?
The first amp that I used was a 410 Fender Bassman.
A Bassman? Oh,
Yeah.
That's Sweet basement.
Yeah. And then I went to the concert after that. It was all revolved around Hogan's House of Music on Hawthorne Boulevard.
Did you
That
buy
was-
it on time? And
Yeah, that was the place. Actually, what happened at the very beginning was my parents and Eddie's parents bought us a couple of Sears guitars. They're like $40 guitars. And then when they saw that we were we were serious about it, they bought us Stratocasters.
well, that's. Thank you. Wish my parents had done that.
I know. Thank you, parents that encourage your
absolutely.
kids to play music and buy them Strats.
My folks were real supportive.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I think we really have to wrap it up. Yep.
Paul, thank you so much
Thank you, Jeff.
for coming down. Please, everybody say hi to Paul. Give him your well wishes. For those who didn't know, Paul's had some medical issues over the last few years, to say the least, right, Paul?
Couple of rough spots.
Couple rough spots, and we're so glad to see him up and moving around.
Thank you.
But he's had a rough go of it, and he's given it the good fight. So
Not terribly rough. It's not like I was, completely out of it.
but let's keep him in our best wishes that he could get back to playing again. So
Absolutely.
I busted my hip a few months ago.
Paul fell and busted his hip, so that's why he's got the cane. Hey,
Thank you, everyone.
give it up one more time for Paul Johnson, everybody.